Welcome to my presentation about entrepreneurship and value creation in my career. All right, so kind of just jumping right into it. This is a bit of like an informal presentation regarding how the topics covered in FSE 301 kind of apply or have been applied in my career and where I kind of see some of the topics we talk about, how they'll affect my career in the future. So to give a brief introduction, my name is Alistair Pocock. I'm a current fourth year mechanical engineering student at ASU at the time of this recording. As of now, I have held two internship positions. One position, my first one, at a civilian aerospace like machine shop / manufacturer, and then my second internship so far and a concurrent internship is at a defense contractor that makes high caliber weapons for the U.S. Armed Forces. Kind of the topics that I want to talk about, the ones that I've seen the most value learning about and I've probably had the most exposure to in industry so far, are certainly market research, voice of the customer, and certainly competitive analysis. I've kind of experienced multiple different projects in both jobs where I've kind of either witnessed or partially utilized these tools in my kind of limited jurisdiction as an intern. And I believe that kind of talking about these can kind of help share to you the importance that some of this stuff has and kind of how it helps guide your thought processes when doing certain projects in industry. So we can start taking a look into that by diving into the importance of market research. This slide is kind of just mostly fact stuff, so I won't talk too much about my experience until the next one. But to kind of begin, continuously analyzing the market always helps you keep up with what's currently being released. Technologically, can be media stuff, the newest marketing technologies or strategies, whatever it may be. Always being on the cutting edge of that is definitely one of the most important things. And understanding where your product fits within the cutting edge of technology is certainly an advantage you'll have going into any sort of industry you choose. Market research also allows companies and developers the opportunity to influence shifts in market forces. And that's kind of like a big general concept, but the way I kind of interpret that is, you could create a product that most people probably don't immediately think they need, but once they start seeing the features of it, and you kind of get this untapped market capital, you'll all of a sudden get this draw of customers because they finally understand the importance, or I guess their unknowing need for the new features that you're bringing with your product. Which that kind of builds onto that other subpoint right there where it says satisfied demand of niche consumer base. And the last point is certainly reduce the risk of jumping into saturated markets. That's probably the biggest thing, honestly, for new products and new entrepreneurs is really getting a bearing on what is currently released so that you are not wasting time and resources in reinventing the wheel and basically producing something that somebody else has already done and is pretty successful at. You're just going to be wasting money and very, very slim chance that you're going to outcompete somebody that already has their kind of territory in the wide turf that is the open market. And one of the strategies you can do to help mitigate running into that problem is coming up with a risk mitigation plan. Those are pretty broad in what they cover, but the kind of consensus that they bring is, what is my fallback plan, my plan B? What can I expect to happen or do if the worst of the worst does happen when I release my product? And it can range in scope depending on how, I guess, resource intensive your product is, or how ambitious you are to help it grow to a certain size. It kind of all just boils down to what you're bringing to the market and how much research you've done and who your competitors are. And the last thing is formulating a detailed plan to assess threats and address weaknesses. That kind of is what a risk mitigation plan achieves, but to kind of break it down into two different things. You want to be able to directly confront what specifically threatens your product to make sure that you can counter those threats. And then you want to address the weaknesses that your product inherently has so that you can fix those and in turn have a better success rate, or I guess better odds to succeed when you take your product to the open market. So kind of taking that information and kind of relating it to my career. Through my experience at my first internship, the civilian aerospace company, the kind of industry as a whole of aerospace is very niche. Not everybody, like your neighbors, have a plane that needs parts when it breaks down. So it's very specific, the market, and there are a lot of competitors for a market that is not very broad. So for that reason, it's extremely important that the company, and in the example, the one I worked at, it's very important for that company to have some sort of alternate product line that kind of provides some financial security in the event, or a lot of the time it's the guarantee that you only have to produce a certain amount of products, and then that manufacturing line just shuts down because they don't need any more. They usually buy a certain amount to fix what's currently being used, and then they have some in stockpile. Not very much, because keeping things in inventory is expensive, but generally you produce a little bit more than what you need in the event that like a part fails upon delivery through like damaging and shipping, or it's just an inherently bad part, even though it should be caught by the quality department. That doesn't always happen. Just small things like that. But anyways, the point of it is, there are times when your company's bread and butter product for something like aerospace is not needed. You need something else to pay your employees, keep the doors open and the lights running. In the sense for the company I worked at, a lot of the stuff that they made were pressure regulators and certain components for the escape slides and like massive airline jets, like the Southwest 737s. That was our most popular product. When those weren't needed, we had other things that we were producing, like pressure gauges, just random machine parts for smaller aircraft manufacturers, things like that, just to continuously have some sort of money, some sort of contract being fulfilled so that we're getting paid. So that kind of moves into the next point, is that the demand in aerospace and defense, it fluctuates rapidly. And that kind of reiterates exactly what I was saying. You're not always going to be producing the same thing over and over again. Like Nike will always be producing t-shirts or shoes. The designs of them might change, but around the entire course of the year, they're producing the same stuff year after year after year, and people will keep buying it. So the model of 24/7 operation works. But it's not like that in defense. You're not always going to be called upon to build, 3,000 AIM-9 missiles, because as soon as you reach a certain amount, the military doesn't need any more. They're not going to spend any more money on it. So your manufacturing line is idle again. So in the sense for defense, what I've seen, at least at my internship now, is when one of the main products that you're known for distributing and manufacturing for your customer is not being produced, you're going to be spending a lot of that contract money that you didn't spend, so basically your earnings, on research and development. And that can be R&D on improving your current design when it's not being produced, or that could be completely trying to reinvent a brand new product that satisfies requirements listed by the customer. And that kind of goes hand in hand with market research. Obviously, for defense, 9 times out of 10, your customer is the U.S. government, or one of the 5 branches in the military. So with that, you kind of constantly getting feedback from military officials about what they want right now, and that always keeps changing. And you have 1,000,001 people trying to get their nose into the door to get a military contract, because they're usually pretty hefty in financial substance, money. So you get a good payout if you have good margins with your products compared to how much they are willing to pay for a contract. So that kind of moves into my last point, which is the best advantage in market research are the connections to the market. And that's exactly what I just mentioned with the military. Um, you want to have direct, clear, and strong communication and relationships with those in, defense, whether that's in the Pentagon directly or just normal lowish ranking officers in the military. It's good to have a big scope to hear the customer feedback of the products that you're either designing or you already have made and are making a new revision for. In aerospace, it's instead of the military, it's the manufacturer or designer of the aircraft. So for our situation, we made a lot of components for the Boeing 737, 747, XYZ, Boeing, and Airbus. So, we had strong connections with those two manufacturers, but we also had good connections with the manufacturers of some sub-assemblies in each of those planes. So for the 737, the escape slides, that was produced by Collins Aerospace, which is a Raytheon company, and we were contracted through them, who's contracted through Boeing to make the all the components for the escape slide. So kind of going up that long telephone, I guess bridge you could call it. We had to talk to people all throughout the way, because when one thing changes on the master assembly, a lot of times everything else trickles down, and you have to make revisions to everything else to make sure it can accompany the new change to the aircraft. And a lot of times that means even the small guys, like what I used to be, would still have to account for the new changes that were being made to the plane. So kind of just wrapping up that concept, it's important that if you plan on going in defense, or you plan on going in aerospace, whether it's a small company, medium company level like I've been exposed to, I can't really speak too much on large, but I can speculate. It really is crucial that you get good information, good data and metrics about what you're going into, what your product is going to experience in comparison to those that are already out. And I could give a million and one examples about different experimental weapons that have lost contracts that are objectively better than what did win. But because the winner of the contract did better research regarding the specific needs of a product and the cost of it, that's the reason they won. So, there's a lot of different variables that go into that kind of thing, but certainly honing in on market research is easily one of the most important things about entrepreneurship in engineering. So then moving on to the next important concept is voice of customer. And this one you can definitely tell when it's not been employed in a product's development, because usually the product doesn't even have any sort of market traction. And basically, to define what voice of customer is, it's just the feedback from the designer, manufacturer, distributor, XYZ, whoever gives or sells the product to the customers. It's their connection to the customers and hearing their feedback and incorporating that into the design/requirements. So kind of diving into some of the points I have here. Voice of customer allows developers to shape their products around requirements and criteria directly from the customer. Kind of what I just said, but in a more refined sense. Customer feedback and preferences allow for products to gain higher chances of success in the market and foster higher brand loyalty. That's a big point, is brand loyalty. I'm sure most of you that are watching this probably have a specific favorite type of car brand, or even just dumb stuff like your preferred paper towel brand or favorite milk brand. It doesn't matter. There's a reason you stick to that, and if a supplier or manufacturer can draw you into their product that first time and it's good enough to satisfy you, the chances of you going back to that product are very high. So being able to kind of bridge that divide between being ambiguous to the consumer and being a brand and household name, voice of customer helps drastically increase your odds of attaining that brand recognition and return from customers. And then lastly, maintaining relationships with the customer can produce more optimized product lines and better distinguishes your product on the open market. Kind of again, when you're in the grocery store and you're selecting, whatever beer you want to get, for example, like there's a reason you go to get Coors Light, or there's a reason you go and get Bud Light, or whatever it may be, and you're going to stick to that. The reason why is because they've distinguished their product amongst the entire, shelf of beer there is at the store. I don't know if that's a great example, but kind of get my drift there. And obtaining the voice of customer really helps you showcase why your product is better. And a lot of that comes from the feedback that a customer gives. And showing to a customer that you value their opinion and their take on your design process and what requirements you're meeting to produce this product shows that, maybe if you're willing to listen to the customer, that perhaps they're going to like your product and there will be a symbiotic relationship that's formed from it. So that's kind of the general gist of VOC as a whole. So here's an example of my VOC that I kind of drew out when I was doing my semester project in FSE 301. To give a brief little background on my project, it basically just was a website that kind of gives you a massive comparison, a catalog, if you will, of different like firearm defense weapons in case you have home break-in or whatever. And I had on the website like every single product stat you could ever want for like the super nerdy firearm people, but at the same time it was really meant to be more user-friendly and informational for people that had no idea what options there were, and they were just trying to look for an option simply to protect their house, whether or not they live in a bad neighborhood or something about just being unsafe or whatever. There's just a place to go for you to get some information instead of just walking into a gun store and having no clue what to do. And so basically kind of looking at my matrix, I would ask certain questions to the customer, whether or not like, hey, are you interested in purchasing a firearm? Have you had a need for one? Not necessarily a need for one, but have you thought of an event where you would need one, kind of thing? And then the customer would express their questions and concerns to me, and I'd write down the ones that I believe were probably the most impactful that they asked or the most brought up. Typically, when you have a quantity of questions that are frequently asked, that generally kind of gives you a hint that you need to address that issue, because that's either a pretty big weakness of your product, or in some instances it could be a threat that a customer kind of identifies for you. And so certainly doing voice of customer surveying or interviews, like in my case here, you can save a lot of time and resources doing either trial and error of just different products on the market, wasting so much time and money trying to find what sticks. Or you could just directly go to the people that are going to buy your stuff or consume your service or whatever it may be, and see what they want. There's no better way than to just go straight to the source. So that's kind of what doing a matrix like this does. It just helps organize what people are concerned about, what their questions are, and kind of how you can move forward from that. So kind of some of my experience with the voice of customer, and this is almost purely just witness based, because obviously they're not going to give interns much connection to government meetings with people with top secret clearances. So kind of just from like a third party perspective, kind of the most essential component of the defense industry is the voice of customer. As I kind of mentioned in the market research slides, the only person that is going to be buying a fighter jet is the United States Air Force or Army or whatever branch of the military. So like I have mentioned here in the subpoint, the only customers are each branch of the DoD, and the example I kind of have is you have kind of four major branches. The Coast Guard doesn't necessarily have much impact in my line of work, but a lot of times they have different requirements for the exact same platform. I have an example at the bottom of the F-35. That's the newest fifth generation fighter jet from the United States. You have the A, the B, and the C variant, and each of them are for different branches of military that have different requirements. I'm sure whoever's watching this probably knows a little bit more about the aircrafts than me, and it's not really too related, but I think it's interesting. I think the A model is for the Air Force, the B is the Navy, and the C is the Marines, but I could be wrong on that. Um, Anyways, the difference is like the A1 is just your standard like conventional aircraft. The B1 has like the VTOL, which is like the plane can kind of come down like a helicopter, and the C model I think has like the folding wingtips, so you can transport it on like a train or whatever. Obviously, each branch of the military suggested had these requirements given to Lockheed. I'm pretty sure the ones that made the F-35, and they had to satisfy each of those requirements. And the only way they got these is by going straight to the customer, which is the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, what you have it. Following the requirements also does not always guarantee winning a contract. A lot of the time, customer requirements often need to be exceeded and at the lowest possible price. It might seem like the government just throws money at programs and just will do anything to get weaponry, and in some cases that might be a little bit true, but ultimately you want to be as cheap as you possibly can, but also have the best performing product possible amongst all your competitors. For an example, the military might say, hey, we want a gun that can, penetrate tank armor from at least 200 meters away. But you come up with a gun that can penetrate tank armor to their requirements 300 meters away. But your gun is, $10,000 to manufacture, and the competitor who can only go up to 250 meters, sells theirs at 7. Both requirements were met, but theirs is dramatically cheaper, even though it's technically worse technology. But it doesn't matter; it satisfies the requirements still, so you lose the contract in turn. That being said, keeping in touch with your customers and kind of showcasing them bits and pieces of your design as you go from nothing to something will dramatically help improve your odds of succeeding at winning a contract, because you'll be constantly getting the feedback given from the customer to continuously improve your design. And that kind of moves into my third point, just reiterating the importance behind strong communication. You gotta really be transparent, especially with government entities, because the red tape is crazy. Things are so slow as is that if you aren't showing and being 100% honest with how your product is being developed, you're going to be setting yourself 10 steps back, 1 step forward every step of the way, and it's just not going to work out for you. So you really got to make sure that you value what you're being told and that you incorporate that, and then you show that you incorporate that to really demonstrate to your customers that, hey, like, I got your back, I'm listening to you, we're considering what you value, and we're incorporating as much as we can in our design. That's definitely the most important part of VOC, and why I think it's the most important for sure in entrepreneurship. And then kind of lastly, competitive analysis. This one is pretty interesting because it's probably got the widest scope out of any of the topics I've talked about so far. Because you could be entering a market where there's just absolutely nothing that compares to your product. It is strictly brand new, innovative idea that nobody has ever thought to take to the open market before. And alternatively, you could be entering a market that's been around for 200, 300 years, and you believe and are trying to sell to consumers that you're incorporating a brand new feature or a brand new technology that sets yourself aside from other producers, manufacturers, brands, whatever it is. And you got to really factor in how you're going to make your way into a condensed market or an open market, and how you're going to get market share that doesn't leave you in a vulnerable or volatile situation. Kind of examples I can give that branch on that idea I just mentioned. Something that's like open market idea. Anything really comes to mind that's like first of its kind. But certainly for closed or for congested market, I mean, Tesla is the easiest one to think of. I mean, most of the cars that it competes against, all of the cars that it competes against, have been around for at least 80 years. In America, Ford, Chevy, all those companies have been around since like 1920, 1930, and Tesla's been around since 2010. So, and they have a pretty big market share, in cars. You know, they might be EVs, something different than what the other people produce, but nonetheless, you know, being able to carve your way into an already competitive market and gain success shows that, you know, what they have, they believed would be successful, and it shows. So kind of moving into some of the points I have is it is important to define your competition in the open market. 9 times out of 10, your product is not addressing the same societal issues alone. Basically, that just means, you know, you're going into a market where there's 5 other people that make the same thing that you want to do. Understanding your market share potential increases the chances your product will meet projections. I'm kind of just building off exactly what I said earlier. You know, you got to know, is there anything left in this market that I can kind of chew up and have for myself? If not, maybe I should stray away from going into it and look at something maybe a little different to kind of capitalize on. And one strategy of competitive analysis is the SWOT analysis, and that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So it's kind of similar to a risk mitigation plan, except a risk mitigation plan is kind of put in place while you're making your product and after you made your product. What are you going to do to address, you know, issues, forces that kind of put your product in jeopardy? The SWOT analysis is the kind of the precursor to that. It's something that you do to before you even really start going into full development and design of your product, to list out all the advantages and disadvantages that your product has against the entire competition over the entire market. So the strengths obviously are the advantages your product or service provide over competitors. And hopefully this is pretty extensive and strong, because that's what's going to set aside your product the most from anything else. And then there's your weaknesses, and that's just simply the disadvantages that your product / service suffers from compared to your competitors. The third is opportunities, and that's the options for growth that your product contains. You know, that market share that you are looking to get, those are your opportunities. And then last is your threats, and those are the factors that completely jeopardize your product. And in fact, or threats can be anything from threats from your competitors or threats from outside factors, you know, geologically, politically, culturally. You know, people that live in, you know, the Midwest aren't going to necessarily have the same benefit of installing solar panels as somebody in, you know, the Southwest, because they don't get as much sunlight, because there's rain all the time. And you know, that's a threat to a solar panel business, is in trying to spread their market share to, you know, a geographical region in the world that doesn't get a lot of sun. You know, that's like me trying to sell solar panels in the UK. Like, nobody's going to buy that. And that's one example of a threat, is, you know, what are the forces that are kind of crushing down on my product that are preventing me from even doing anything in a certain market? And that's kind of the main aspect of utilizing competitive analysis, understanding that. So then kind of moving into my experience with competitive analysis. As mentioned prior, in defense and aerospace, there are several competitors. When you kind of look at each product individually, in each industry, you usually have, I mean, you can have up to 10 to 20 companies fighting for one specific contract. So it's important to distinguish what makes your product more desirable. And I kind of went over that in the previous slide, so I won't get too in detail again here. But my next point is sometimes it's not about making a brand new product or service, but rather developing an improved revision of a currently existing product. There's no better example, I think, in defense than the M4 rifle. You know, it's gone through 4 design revisions. That's what the A4 means, following the M4. And you know, in order to keep up with new technological advancements per se, as well as just general feedback from the customers, in this case, you know, soldiers in the U.S. Armed Forces. I believe it's Colt, but anyways, the manufacturer of the M4, they needed to revise their firearm in order to maintain their contract, because there were competitors that were fighting to get that contract because they claimed they had a better platform. And then obviously, since it's still in service today, they've still been the favorite. And that's kind of part of your competitive analysis, is stacking up your either new product or current product against what competitors are offering. Gaining familiarity with your opposition is another good point. And this basically can stem from either reaching out to the consumers of your competitor or you yourself consuming a product from your competition, and to kind of understand and gauge what might be the factors that make it desirable for other customers. This doesn't necessarily entail reverse engineering, because obviously there's a lot of legalities that go on behind reverse engineering, on like patents and stuff like that, and licensing of things. So I won't get into that, but certainly knowing who you're going up against is probably one of the most critical components of business as a whole, because without it, you're basically taking a shot in the dark, and it could lead to disaster for a startup, even for a company that's well established. If they're trying to enter a new market that they have not been in prior or have been absent from for many, many years, it could be hard to come back in or enter for the first time. And certainly your odds are already so against you in such a competitive market, especially with it being global, like today's economy, that you need to get any sort of competitive edge you can. And one of the best ways is employing competitive analysis techniques into your product. And that finally moves us into the conclusion. I don't want to go too in depth here because obviously, we're above 30 minutes in the video already. But kind of just tying everything together that I've gone over. I'll just read the points here. Entrepreneurial-driven engineers differ from the norm because of their complex tool set to analyze, predict, and address the market to incorporate their vision. They understand what forces drive the consumer to choose certain products and utilize this data to better instill success in their business. By using customer-driven focus, the entrepreneur can create strong relationships with the open market to better advance their product satisfaction upon delivery. And above all, utilizing these skills creates value in multiple domains in a person's life, giving them the edge to succeed regardless of career or ecosystem. And that's honestly probably the most important thing that I've kind of taken away, like macroscopically, from the content that you go over in FSE 301 is, while it's kind of tailored towards entrepreneurship and engineering, pretty much everything that we've gone over can be either tightly or loosely extrapolated and kind of transferred into any other industry that you may find yourself up in one day. So like medicine, or I don't even know, just general business like banking, whatever it may be. Like you could use these strategies to really hone in your proficiency with being connected with the market and ensuring that your product has a favorable success over any competition, and mainly to preserve longevity. That's one thing that many people forget is, you might strike gold now, but what's it going to be like in 10 years? So you kind of have to, adjust yourself, pace your company, pace your growth to make sure you can sustain long-term, market share, and to continue driving customers towards buying your product. Because if you make something that is really good, but only one person needs it, well, eventually you're going to fill up every household, and then what are you going to do? You got to find something else to sell, or you got to come out with something even better than what they previously offered. So all these factors come together, and obviously it's a skill, it's a tool, and tools can be lost and forgotten. So it's very important that as engineers, or whatever you may be studying, that you continue to practice these in whatever way you can. Whether that's continuing taking entrepreneurial and business oriented classes, or trying to apply some of these philosophies to your everyday work environment, whether you work at an internship or even if you're still working just entry-level jobs, it can be utilized and seen being utilized pretty much anywhere. And I think that's the important part of the general kind of concept that you take away in FSE 301, is just prioritizing the customer, understanding the environment around you, and making sure to drive your product to success by kind of utilizing your tools the most effectively and efficiently as possible. So with that, I appreciate you watching my video and listening to my experience a little bit, and I hope you were able to relate in some way or kind of use this as inspiration within your own career. And I wish you the best of luck with the start or the finish of your semester whenever you see this. Thank you.